So the revival of the Testarossa name is a big deal in the Ferrari world. Of course, it was first used back in 1956 on the Ferrari 500, and that denoted the red cylinder head, and that meant it was the most extreme, most powerful engine. But most people, of course, know it from the iconic 1984 Testarossa supercar, and it's wonderful to have it back in the Ferrari lineup. Now, I've literally spent 5 minutes with the new 849 Testarossa, and it is a lot to take in. There's definitely much more of a squared off look, so it's definitely picked up where the F80 hypercar has left off. It is actually not all new. Beneath the skin is the SF90 Stradale's aluminium space frame chassis that has the carbon fibre bulkhead, but there's some delightful design highlights. They have these twin tail boiler elements here, and that's supposed to come from the old 70s 512S prototype racer. But overall, it's a lot more dramatic. It's pretty special in the flesh, and this will be very much the fastest Ferrari series production car because things like the F80 are limited and they're specially limited again. So there we are, the heart of the beast. The 849 Testarossa comes with the hybridized 4-litre twin-turbo V8 that the old SF90 used to feature. But this time it produces a lot more power. This thing is combined with triple E motors and an 8-speed dual clutch transmission, and the power outputs are quite epic. It produces 37 kilowatts more than before, which raises the total power to a barely believable 772 kilowatts and 842 Newton meters of torque. And what does that translate to? Well, that translates to some epic performance. From 0 to 100 kilometers per hour now takes around 2.3 seconds, which is the same as the SF90, but when you're talking about something like 0 to 200 kilometers per hour, that falls to around 6.4 seconds, which is a tenth quicker than before. Top speed is around 330 kilometers per hour. In fact, Ferrari says it will go faster than that. But the funniest thing about this car is, remember, this is a plug-in hybrid. So thanks to a 7.45 kilowatt hour battery, this can still drive silently for up to 25 kilometers. To liberate that extra 37 kilowatts, Ferrari almost started from scratch. It introduced a new engine block, cylinder heads, new exhaust manifolds, there's an entirely new intake, there's things like a titanium fasteners that cut some of the weight off, and there's also an all-new valve train system. But probably the biggest star feature is an all-new turbocharger, which Ferrari says is the biggest turbocharger it's ever fitted to a road car. Now, despite almost starting from scratch when it comes to the combustion V8, Ferrari has carried over the triple E motors almost unchanged, which means there's an axial flux E motor in the engine bay, and there's also a pair of radial flux motors in here that produces around 162 kilowatts and provide for a traction boosting all-wheel drive. Now, despite the twin-turbo V8 only producing an extra 37 kilowatts, Ferrari says it needs around 15% more cooling. And that explains why designers have opened up the lower half of this bumper here to allow more air to hit the radiators. It's also taken some design cues from the F80 by introducing a set of intercoolers that live in there. That means that the engine can produce its maximum 772 kilowatts at all times. The Ferrari F80 has been hugely influential in the 849 Testarossa design, mainly because when they were designing the boxy squared off 80, they realised it was exceedingly good for aerodynamics. And that explains why the shape of the SF90 replacement is, again, very, very squared off. Now, important features to point out in this car is this new front splitter that, believe it or not, is responsible for around 10% of the downforce alone. But underneath here, there are some really complex air bending that includes vortex generators, fins and channels that basically jets the air to the back of the car to the multi-level rear diffuser. So the front of this car, well, that's responsible for around 35% of the downforce. But wherever you look, there are some really complex air bending from these really subtle front side splitters here. But at the back of the car, it's the twin tails. Just look at these twin tails. I wouldn't even care if they worked or not because they look really, really cool. You can see is the twin element rear diffuser, which again, I think kicks in another 30% aero. Almost forgot, there's also some active aerodynamic as well. Lifted or inspired from the recent Speciale, there is this blade here that pops up to give a high downforce setting. It can also switch from high downforce to low downforce in around a second. There will also be an Assetto Fiorano kit that carves around 30 kilograms off the curb weight, but it deletes the twin tails here and adds a multi-level fixed rear spoiler and extra cooling at the front for the brakes and intakes, and basically boosts downforce a little bit for around $100,000. As you would hope and expect, Ferrari claim that the new 849 Testarossa will be nothing short of the finest car to drive in its class, and to ensure that, it has introduced new dampers and springs all around and given it a new suspension tune. But it's not just that. Of course, it wouldn't be a Ferrari without a whole host of electronic armoury introduced to this car to ensure that it goes faster than anything else. And indeed, this car is said to boast around 3% more lateral grip and roll around 10% less. Now, at the heart of its driving dynamics is something called Ferrari 5, which is Ferrari's integrated vehicle estimator. That's it. And basically, it manages things like the E4-wheel drive, the rear electronic differential, and things like the yaw angles, and basically ensures a consistent, repeatable attack of any corner for the cleanest exit. So nothing will be faster. It also has a development of Ferrari's ABS Evo system, which basically means this car can brake harder than you would ever imagine before the ABS intervenes, which means this should be an absolute monster on track. Inside the 849 Testarossa, there has been some big changes. So within the cabin, of course, you get the obligatory passenger display here. You get a large digital instrument cluster, but there's been some fundamental changes in the architecture of the cabin. There's this new carbon fiber bridge here, which is quite stunning with these red inserts. It's also got the gear selector from the F80. I'm not sure if we like that or not, but I know something Ferrari owners will absolutely adore, and that is the physical buttons back on the steering wheel, which should make this car a lot easier to use in the real world. But overall, yeah, it's pretty stunning in here. That was our first look at the new Ferrari 849 Testarossa. Now, we think this will be on sale in the first half of Europe next year, but exact timings for down under has still to be announced. But when it arrives in Australia, we think it will be priced at around $900,000 plus on-roads, with an additional $100,000 charged for the Assetto Fiorano kit. That is a serious amount of money, but this is a serious bit of kit. It looks stunning in the flesh, and it actually looks like a limited run supercar rather than a series production Ferrari, which can only be a good thing.